So, is the life course perspective of how events taking place from infanthood to old age affects the different kinds of well-being, financial health, among other things, education, and so on. This. And there are 5 principles of the life course perspective. If we want to truly understand the life course perspective, it's better to understand all 5 principles. All 5 principles are detailed in chapter 7. I do not require you to read that chapter. Maybe I should. It's too late. So, remember granny bashing? What is granny bashing? We've been through this on Wednesday. It's linked to elderly abuse, right? It was first discovered in the US as granny bashing. Does that ring a bell? And after that, what happens? After that, more research takes place on elderly abuse until today. After they coined the term granny bashing. But we know that granny bashing is only coined in the US. I don't know if people in other countries heard about granny bashing during this time or later. Maybe now they all do with internet. Not during the 70s, not so much. So, the time and place principle says that events shape people's perceptions and decisions. And granny bashing only took place in the US, not other countries. So in the 70s, people in other countries may not be aware of elderly abuse, even if it was ongoing. Because of that, people's perception of elderly abuse can vary across locations, across societies, across cultures, and across countries. Can you see that? And this affects how they make decisions. And people in the US in the 70s, regardless of their age, they may realize that now we have something called granny bashing. And they may decide that when I hit old age, I should be more protected. People in other countries may have a different mindset during the 70s. Can you see that? If they never heard of granny bashing. And the timing principle focus on chronological order of a person's age or chronological order pertaining to a generation. So, an individual who heard about granny bashing as a young adult, maybe the person was a young adult in the 70s, may have different perceptions and may be propelled to make different decisions. If the person was a teenager in the 70s, and if the person heard about granny bashing, regardless of where he was, US or other countries, doesn't matter. Maybe he or she could learn about granny bashing through the radio, through the TV, even before the internet. Who knows? If the person was a middle-aged adult, the person may form different opinions pertaining to elderly abuse that he or she may or may not encounter. Now, it has got attention of the public, the medical professionals, people in all walks of life. the middle-aged adult in the 70s may make different decisions because he or she has different perceptions pertaining to granny bashing compared to the teenager. If the person is an elderly person in the 70s, when this just came about, the person may change their perception somewhat. They may be conditioned to think that this is what I may have to go through when I get old, when I am dependent on others for my needs. This is what I have to put up with. All of a sudden, granny bashing came about on the news. It may change your mindset, either swiftly or gradually. So, the older person in the 70s may have different perceptions of elderly abuse compared to the teenager and young adults during the same time. Can we see that? And the generation before baby boomers, some call that the traditionalist cohort, the generation that experienced the Great Depression. Some may be in their old age, some may be in their late 40s, early 50s or 60s. This traditionalist generation, they may have certain perceptions about granny bashing because they were in their late 40s to old age, depending on how long they live. They may make certain decisions pertaining to this very differently from the baby boomers cohort. Baby boomers may still be young adults during this time, in their 20s or 30s. They may have different perceptions about elderly abuse because they know they will not experience this until decades to come. Or maybe they may not experience this because now granny bashing got attention. Can you see that? Because of that, baby boomers cohort are going to make different decisions because they have different perceptions about granny bashing, given their different ages during the 70s compared to the traditionalist cohort. Any question? And lifespan development focus on how certain events we experience from infanthood to middle age or even old age affects our different spheres of well-being, financial, education, income, wealth, health, cognitive performance, visual functioning, among other things, from infanthood to old age. This is what the lifespan development is about. Experience from infanthood is going to be biological, social, and ecological development as it progresses from infanthood to old age. And if you remember the Vietnamese guy, Hiên Linh, they have a younger sister. They have a younger sister. And because of that, and she was born in 75, a few months after the communists took over. So, when she was an infant, she was malnourished. And this may affect her adult life, I don't know, even after they moved to the US. Because we all know the cortisol plays different function in our system. And if people like Kian's family that endure all kinds of stress and strain is going to undermine their immune system for sure. Maybe it's going to affect their glucogenesis, who knows? It's going to affect how they respond to stress. It's going to affect their BP and heart functioning, who knows? These, because of the stress the family experienced during their days, younger days in Vietnam, is going to affect their biological development. One way is by messing up the cortisol. And cortisol plays at least 5 functions, I know. Maybe you know more. I'm a sociologist. And I think when people are under stress, like Kian's family, it's good to increase but not decrease the cortisol level. I think cortisol is something like the stress hormones. Am I right? So when cortisol is increased due to instability and stress among other things, it's good to increase angiotensin too. It's good to increase our BP. It's good to increase our risk for peptic ulcer. It's going to affect our glucose tolerance. Increase in cortisol is going to increase our vascular response to neuroperiphery. And it's going to increase renal sodium retention. When one or more of these takes place due to increase in cortisol, it's going to lead to all these health problems. At least one of these is going to lead to comorbidities later on in life. And this is what we mean by the lifespan development. Things, people, events or things people experience even early on in life, like Kian Yun's family, is going to affect the biological development. One way is through the level of cortisol. And it affected their social development too. Kian Yun, if you read the book, when the communists confiscated their house, they moved to their aunt's house. Do you think it's going to be a big happy family? Everybody live together, including the grandparents. So it affected their social developments. They had conflict. Their moms had conflict with her own sister, her aunt. And they had conflict with their cousins when everybody lived under the same roof. It's hard to be a happy family, happy big family. It affected their social development. Can you see that? And to some degree, because we've been through this, Kian went through therapy in college, in dentistry school, and in college in the US. So obviously, things he endured as a child affected his psychological development. Can you see that? And the fourth principle of life course is the agency principle. The agency principle assumes that as individuals, we all have autonomy or the freedom to decide to make decisions or to pick among the choices options available to us. That's the assumption of the agency principle. It assumes that we all are not passive recipients of social events. We don't passively respond to social events around us. It says we have autonomy which can be true in certain stages of our lifespan, maybe not entirely from infanthood to old age. I think Kian's mother had agency before 1975, and the whole family, including other Vietnamese who stayed behind, they lose their freedom under communist rule. And they had autonomy again after they moved to the US. Until old age. This is what we mean by the principle of agency. Can you see that? And what is the principle of linked life? The chapter 16, the one you are required to read, mentioned about linked life. The principle of linked life focus on how we don't exist alone as an island. It assumes, which is true, that no one is an island. We are often interdependent with one another, and we are often integrated in one particular culture, in one society, or into our neighborhood and community. Even if you join a group virtually, that is your support system. Maybe they are different virtual groups today on elderly abuse. And if the older person, for any reason, maybe due to no transportation, due to functional impairment, visual impairment, or other illnesses, cannot go out and mingle with certain groups that serve their interests, they join virtual group. They are still interdependent. And it's like any groups on any social media. They can discuss and talk about any abuse they face, who knows, with people who may be facing the same thing, people of their age group. They are still interdependent. And they are integrated into the social web of that virtual group. And the linked life principle also talks about how norms and how institutions operate affect how we can be interdependent, how we can interact with other people around us, whether it's our caretaker, family and friends or neighbors. And let's go back to granny bashing. It wasn't the norm to talk about granny bashing before the 70s, right? So the interdependence form, if it can be formed, if older adults are able to connect to people like that. The interdependence form among older adults before granny bashing is different than the interdependence form among older adults who suffer the same thing, or the interdependence formed among older adults and their caretaker is going to be different after granny bashing was being coined as a type of crime against older adults in the 70s. It's going to affect the interdependency between the caretaker and the older person, between the family members, friends, intimate friends, especially, and the older person, or between the neighbors and the older person. Maybe when they coined the term granny bashing, it made the news and it affected how the political institutions or local governments function. Now government at all levels are more aware of granny bashing. They are going to pay attention. Maybe they are going to liaise with other organizations, shelters in the neighborhood to pay attention to granny bashing. And when granny bashing came about, older adults may have more agency, more autonomy. They realize now it is a crime to be mean to me. I can sue, I can complain, and now government is aware I can do something. And it's going to affect how older adults are integrated into their communities. Things are going to change before and after granny bashing came about. After granny bashing came about, older adults to this day are less likely to be passive recipients of all kinds of abuses. Even though from the name, it seems to us like granny bashing focus more on physical abuse. But older adults will figure out, yeah, I can do something about people pilfering my money from my bank account. I can do something about other kinds of abuse. They are more aware. So this is what we mean by the principle of linked life.